America's youngest ever serial killer was just 13 years old when he got away with his first ever murder. But that was just the start of the horrors that he would go on to commit while he was still a child. So today's video is going to be another solved true crime case. Today we're going to be talking about a serial killer case, and this serial killer is known as the Warwick slasher. We've got a little bit of a change in background today. I just had to replace the Christmas tree quickly because it's not Christmas anymore, so we've got a mate for this video. Say hi to Lapras. But quickly, before we get into the case, I do just want to thank our sponsors for making this video possible, Casetify. Casetify phone cases have been my absolute favourite now for years, for a multitude of reasons. First of all, I have never smashed my phone while I've been wearing a Casetify phone case. For years. I haven't smashed my phone in years. I used to do it like monthly at one point. I remember when I was in school, I used to have to get it repaired like every other week, but that is a thing of the past ever since I discovered Casetify. Their cases are up to 11.5 foot drop protected, which is 5 times the military grade standard. So you can just throw this about and it should be fine. Like, it's been fine for me for ages. But even with all that protection, the cases are still so like sleek and slim and still so cute as well. I'm always changing my phone case to like match my outfit or match the vibe of the event that I'm going to. I have like clear ones, I have customized ones that have my name on. You can even put your own photos on cases as well. But I just have like tons and tons of different prints because Casetify have so many to choose from. And one thing I really love about Casetify is that a lot of their prints are collabs with like independent artists, over 300 independent artists from all over the world. So when you buy one of those cases with their prints on, you're directly supporting that artist. And if you've heard me talk about Casetify before, you already know that they do so much for the environment. That's one of the reasons I've always loved them, is because they're always figuring out ways to reduce waste and be more sustainable. They have the Casetify program, which upcycles old, unused cases into brand new ones. They managed to reduce so much waste. They've reduced their carbon footprint by 20% with this program. And they've managed to upcycle over 51,000 phone cases that would probably just end up in landfill otherwise, but now they've been made into a brand new case for someone new to enjoy. So if you're looking for a pretty little shell for your expensive electronic device, then go to casetify.com/Eleanor and you will automatically get 15% off applied at checkout. Thank you so much to Casetify for sponsoring this video. Now, before we get into it, I do just want to give my usual disclaimer that I mean absolutely no disrespect to anyone that I talk about in this video. This video is for educational purposes, and everything that I'm about to say is just information that I have found on the internet and I'm compiling into one video. Just a couple of trigger warnings before we get into the case. This one has themes of racism and it also covers the murder of 2 children. So if either of those are things that you don't really want to hear about right now, I completely understand. Click out of the video. Hopefully I'll get to catch you again some other time with a different video. But for now, look after yourself, and with all that being said, I'm gonna get into the case. So today's case takes place in Warwick in Rhode Island in the USA. In the late 80s, number 60 Inez Avenue was home to the Heaton family, which was made up of 39-year-old mother Joan Heaton and her 2 young daughters, 10-year-old Jennifer and 7-year-old Melissa. Joan was previously married to a sergeant named John Heaton, who was the father of both of her children. However, sadly, he took his own life just a few years before this case. So at this point in time, it was just the 3 girls together taking on the world. The Heaton family were very close, possibly because of losing their father. All 3 girls were just really close together. They did everything together. The girls confided in their mother, and Joan herself was really close with her own sister and her mother. It was a very like female led family. It was just all girls, all supporting each other. But on September 4th, 1989, Joan's mother and her sister were getting a bit worried about her. It was Labor Day weekend. Well, actually, Labor Day weekend had just finished, and they hadn't seen her or heard from her. They hadn't got a text or a call or anything, which was very unusual. They normally spent like little holidays and stuff together. They normally celebrated together, went out together whenever they had time off, but this time was completely different and with no explanation. By the Monday, they were calling her phone, texting her over and over again, calling anyone she knew, and they just couldn't get through to her. And so her mother and her sister on that Monday morning decided to go down to Joan's house and see if she was okay. They knocked on the door, but they got no response. Joan didn't come, and so they kept knocking, they kept shouting, but no one was coming to the door. And at this point, they managed to make their way in the house. I don't know how, I think one of them likely had a spare key, but they made their way into the house. And there in the hallway, they saw the most horrifying thing. There was blood covering absolutely every surface. The walls, it was all over the floor. And then in the hallway, there was this big bundle of sheets that was also covered in blood. They feared what could have been in that bundle of sheets, and so her mother and her sister called the police, who came down and found that this was the body of Joan Heaton. She had been murdered, her body had been bundled up in these sheets and then just left in the hallway. And what's even worse, her two young daughters were also found murdered just feet away from their mother's body. All three bodies were transferred to the morgue where autopsies were performed, and this is where the true horrors of their murders were revealed. Joan Heaton, the mother, had been brutally attacked in so many different ways, more than just being stabbed, which is what they knew from looking at her body. She had clear stab wounds all over her. But it was more than just that. She'd been strangled as well. She'd been beaten by her attacker. She had blood pooling and just general trauma all over her body where she'd been beaten or like thrown to the floor. And she even had a fractured skull, which they don't really know how that came about, probably just from being thrown around by her attacker. But on top of that, the pathologist counted 57 stab wounds all over her body in total. And they really were all over her body, even on her face, which you don't see all that often. You don't see a murderer specifically targeting someone's face. That's a very, I don't know, if you're stabbing someone's face, you're not really trying to kill them, you're just letting out anger and like steam there, I guess. Of the two daughters, it was 10-year-old Jennifer that actually had the most stab wounds out of all three of them. She had 62. A 10-year-old little girl. She also had a fractured skull, which again, it's not really clear how that came about other than just, you know, the aggression of the attack in general. I think it could be possible that they'd maybe been laid on the floor as they were being stabbed and then maybe tried to get up, but they were pushed back down, and then that's when their head like hit the floor, maybe fractured their skull somehow that way. 7-year-old Melissa, the youngest of all of the victims, actually had her skull pretty much crushed completely. They all had these different skull fractures and injuries, but like I say, Melissa's was completely crushed. It seemed as though the attacker had used one of the kitchen stools to just beat her over the head with repeatedly. Melissa had also been stabbed as part of her attack. I don't know how many times. All three of them had been stabbed. All three of them had these injuries to their skulls. And one of the two young girls, I'm not sure which victim it was, but one of them was found with the knife blades still inside of her, suggesting that the attack had been so vicious, so savage, so aggressive that the knives had broken inside them. And their attackers just kept on going. They just found another knife and just kept going. The handles of these knives were not found anywhere near the scene. They weren't found in any kind of searches. So it's believed that the attacker probably took them away with him. And as part of the autopsy, the pathologist could even tell how long the three victims had been dead for. And it turns out they'd been laid dead in that house 3 days. They were killed at the very start of the weekend, and their bodies weren't found until the Monday. Though one thing was very interesting about how this murder scene was found. All three of the victims, it wasn't just Joan, all three of them were covered by something. The attacker had covered up each of the dead bodies before leaving. Joan had been wrapped up in loads of sheets. I've read in different sources that one of them was covered with a rug, one of them was covered with a blanket, but it just makes you wonder why. Like, for what reason the attacker went out of their way to cover up these bodies before fleeing the scene. Was it because they felt guilty? Could they have even felt remorse? Or were they just embarrassed or ashamed of what they'd done, or they didn't want to think about what they'd done, or I don't know what the thought process was there. It wasn't like they were trying to clean up the scene at all by any means, so I wonder why. So, crime scene investigators got to work at the scene, and because there was so much blood absolutely everywhere downstairs in this house, blood analysis was a really big part of this case. And they actually managed to find a pretty big footprint in the blood. It was more like a sock print, it wasn't a footprint. It was just like the shape of a foot. A very big one. Bigger than any of the victims, bigger than Jones, and obviously bigger than the kids. So it must have been the attackers. It was measured and it was found to be about a man's size 13. So a really big foot. The attacker that they're looking for must be a big guy. This already narrowed down their suspect range by quite a lot. Not that they had any individual suspects, but just generally people that they think could have done it. It narrowed down that pool a lot. But that was kind of all they really had right now. The crime scene didn't offer up any more clues or any more evidence as to who could have done this. There was just that footprint. Well, actually, there was one more thing. Pathologists think they found a fourth blood sample in that house. So there were the 3 victims, and then one more type of blood. They didn't know whose blood this was, probably the attackers. But this suggested that the attacker had probably hurt themselves at some point during the stabbings. Maybe they'd missed and stabbed their own hand or their own arm. So then this was another piece of evidence to use to maybe try and find a suspect. Maybe they should look for big, tall men with some sort of hand injury or a bandage around their wrist or something along those lines. So a few days go by and this triple murder is all over the news because it's so tragic, it's so heartbreaking, it's so scary that someone that is capable of killing a single mother and her 2 young daughters is just out there in the world, at large. They could strike again at any moment. So everyone was talking about this case. But there was one person who lived very close to the Heatons that all of this just sounded way too eerily familiar. A man came forward to police who said that he had lost his sister in a very similar murder just 2 years prior. And that murder took place in the exact same neighbourhood. The victim of this other murder from 2 years ago, her name was Rebecca Spencer. She was 27 years old at the time. She was actually a mother of 2. She was freshly divorced, so she'd just come out of having a family, a husband, these 2 kids, and now she was a single mother. And she was determined to give them a really, really good life. She went back and got her GED, which is the basic high school qualification over there in America. She went and got her GED so that she would then be able to go on and get a better job to support her 2 kids. For the time being, she was living just down the road from where Joan Heaton lived with her 2 kids and their cat. And I believe she was living with her brother, or her brother was staying there with them at the time. And at the time of her murder, she was actually in the process of moving out of that house and moving into a new one with her brother and the 2 kids, and they were gonna start fresh after the divorce. They were literally days away from moving house in July of 1987. Pretty much everything was in boxes. Everything apart from the mattress and the TV so that they could sleep and have a little bit of entertainment, but everything else was boxed up. And I think for that reason the 2 kids weren't staying there at this point in time. They might have been staying with their dad or something, I'm not entirely sure. But all I know is that it was only Rebecca in the house on the night of her murder. Her brother actually worked the night shift, so I think he was also sleeping on that mattress on the living room floor, but they would just kind of take turns. So he'd be out at work during the night while she was asleep, and then he would come back in the morning, fall asleep, and she would go out and do her job. And that's exactly what was supposed to happen on July 28th. Her brother got home from his night shift, he was exhausted, he was ready to go to bed. But when he arrived at the house, the front door was open. And so he walked in and walked into the living room, and there he found his own sister murdered in a pool of her own blood on the living room floor. Carl phoned the police, who started a crime scene investigation, and Rebecca's body was transported to the morgue. Her autopsy revealed that she had been stabbed 58 times in the top half of her body. And that's actually insane. You hear these numbers in true crime videos and they become slightly normalised when it comes to like insane criminals. Stabbing someone 50, 60 times doesn't sound like as much as it actually is in reality. Imagine how much time and effort and energy you would have to exert to do that same action upwards of 60 times over and over again. There's also the probability that the attacker is trying to hold the victim down. Maybe they're trying to fight them off, so that's even more energy. Like, whenever I hear of a killer stabbing someone 50, 60, even 100 times, you just wonder how on earth that is even humanly possible. It must be like all the adrenaline and the anger like swirling up inside them that just makes them keep going and going and going for like minutes at a time. Frenzied stabbing someone for so long must be a very tiring process. You must really want to do that in order to do it. Like, you must really want to make sure that that person is not coming out of this alive. If you're stabbing them 60 times, there is probably no chance of survival there. He knows he has just killed his victim. Again, this tells police quite a bit about their attacker, that it's either a really big, strong, physically strong person able to do that, or alternatively, it's a really angry person who has just been filled with a lot of adrenaline due to this emotion, and that is what's like been able to power them through all of that physical what's the word? Physical exertion. The actual crime scene itself offered up virtually no clues or leads or evidence at all. There was nothing that the killer had left behind, or, there was nothing. There was absolutely nothing. Police spoke with neighbours, but there were no witnesses, no one saw or heard anything, and Rebecca Spencer's murder quickly went cold. It was unsolved. There was some crazed attacker out there at large getting away with this. Police had no suspects. They had nowhere left to look, and so eventually they kind of stopped trying. And Rebecca Spencer's killer, at this point in the case, her brother has heard this triple murder of Joan Heaton and her 2 kids. Rebecca Spencer's murder still isn't solved. And so he got in touch with the police and he said, look, these seem very, very similar. Please can you look into my sister's murder parallel to the Heaton murder investigation? These 2 cases are very, very similar for a number of reasons. First of all, there's even just the geography of them. It happened down the road. It's literally the same stretch of road. You just kind of go around a corner and Inez Avenue turns into a different street, and then that's where Rebecca Spencer lived. It's literally a 2-minute walk. A 2-minute walk between both of those houses. So immediately this is looking like the killer probably lives close by, maybe in that exact same neighbourhood, or maybe it's just a ploy. Maybe they don't live anywhere near. Maybe they kill in this specific neighbourhood for a reason, who knows. Another characteristic that was the same between both of these cases was the fact that a knife was used in all 4 killings. They'd all been stabbed, and actually overkill was a big part of all of these murders. They had been stabbed way more times than is necessary to kill them. The attacker just kept going and going and going. Especially those young girls would have likely been dead after like 10, even 20 stab wounds, but he just kept going. 62 is insane. And actually the knives, the specific knives that were used to stab all the different victims, were all knives that were taken from their own kitchens. So the attacker in both instances had broken into the victim's home, the woman's home, found a knife in her kitchen, and then used her own knife to stab her to death. This killer just seemed like someone who very much enjoyed inflicting excess violence and aggression on young women and girls. There were a lot of things that pointed to this being a repeat killer, and now that they had killed 3 more people, if this was true, they were looking for a serial killer. There was a serial killer at large, and it seemed this serial killer lived very close by, perhaps in the same neighbourhood. So police focused on what evidence they did have of the killer, or potential evidence that they had. So for example, he had size 13 feet. They imagined that he was a very big guy, very tall, strong, probably like quite broad, kind of guy. And there was also the possibility that he had some sort of injury from the previous murders. He might have stabbed himself in the process, so maybe they were looking for someone with stitches or a cut or a bandage, something like that. So police start making their way around the neighbourhood, taking stock of all the men, interviewing different people here and there, and then all of a sudden, one of the officers spotted something. So there were these two detectives out driving in the same police car, and one of them pointed to this rather tall looking man on the side of the street, and they were like, oh hey, what about him? The other police officer in the car looked over at this guy that his colleague was pointing at, and he was like, oh, hang on, I know him. Turns out this very tall, very large man that they'd seen walking down the road wasn't actually a man at all. It was a 15-year-old boy. He was just very big for his age. He was over 6 foot tall, he was upwards of 300 pounds, he was an athlete, he was just a very big 15-year-old boy. This officer recognised the 15-year-old boy because in his free time the officer was actually a basketball coach for the local kids. And this was one of the kids that he coached. So the officers pull their car over to him and they flag him down to come over and talk. This kid's name was Craig Price. And as he walked over to the car, now that he was front on, police noticed that he had a bandage around his hand. So he walks over to the car, they're chatting to him through the window for a little bit, and then one of them brings up this bandage and they said, oh, what have you done to your hand? And Craig tells this story about how a couple of days ago he got blackout drunk. He's 15 years old. He got blackout drunk and then punched through the window of a car in the neighbourhood. So police just kind of accepted his story in the moment, kept chatting to him, and then drove away. When they got back to the police station, they decided to check out Craig's story. So they start looking on the system for any reports of car robberies or car vandalism in that neighbourhood from the past few days, but there was none. No one had reported having their car window smashed in. So now police are quite suspicious of Craig Price. Why had he lied about this injury on his hand? So they called him up and they asked him to come down to the police station again. They wanted to question him again, mainly about his hand. So he came down to the police station with his parents, because again, he was a minor, he was 15, so he couldn't be questioned alone. He came down with his parents, he was asked again what he did to his hand, and he told this exact same story, actually, about how he went out, punched his car. Police really thought he was lying about this car story, but he wasn't going to admit that he was lying, and so they asked if he would be willing to take a lie detector test to tell that exact same story again, that he got drunk and punched a car window, but then they would know if he was lying about it or not. And Craig actually agreed. He was like, yep, sure, I'll do it. But the results of that lie detector test came back that Craig was lying about how he injured his hand. So now police had proof. This didn't say that he was a murderer, it just said that he was lying about how he hurt his hand. But still, that's suspicious that he won't tell police the truth, that he'd stuck to this fake story so many times whenever he was asked. There was a lot of suspicion against Craig Price at this point in time. What was he trying to hide? So police started digging into him a little bit more. They wanted to know who Craig Price was. And so they started opening up interviews with everyone in his life. His family, his friends, school friends, teachers, anyone that knew Craig. And from this, they started to find out a lot of dark secrets about Craig's childhood. Craig Chandler Price was born on October 11th, 1973 into a working class family in Massachusetts. When Craig was about 4 or 5 years old, his family upped and moved to Warwick in Rhode Island, which was a very, very white area at the time, and racism was still very prevalent. And Craig would experience a lot of racism growing up. We don't even know the half of it. There's only a few incidents that are actually detailed as part of this case, but I know that this was a daily thing for him. There was just so much tension and aggression towards this innocent little kid who has done nothing other than be born. It was a lot of older white kids that would be aggressive towards him, shouting things at him, sometimes even violent towards him. Actually, some of the worst offenders of racism towards Craig Price were adults, fully grown, fully developed adults were being horrid to this child. He would get shouted at in the streets, he would get taunted, he would be called slurs. And I know I said that people would, on occasion, get physically violent, but that was actually quite a rare thing, especially as Craig grew up, because like I say, he was very physically intimidating. He was over 6 foot, nearly 300 pounds. He was clearly a very strong person that could hold his own. So people didn't try to physically harm him a lot. Well, not with their own bare hands. People would try to hurt Craig in other ways where he couldn't really fight back. You'll see in a second. But his really big height, his really big frame, was quite an advantage to him for a few different reasons. He loved it when it came to sports. It made him super good at like anything he tried. He was really, really good at basketball and football. His teammates gave him the nickname Iron Man because he was literally like, the other teams just could not get past Craig Price. He was just so wide and broad, and like, he was like a unit. He was just such a good team member to have because he was really good at defense. He was really tall, so he could shoot. He was really good at sports. Craig just really liked being a big guy because it gave him the opportunity to look intimidating when he needed to. He could be scary when he wanted to be, which meant that people did keep their distance more often than not. But personality-wise, Craig Price was the complete opposite of scary and intimidating. He was actually supposedly very soft-spoken, rather timid, actually. He was polite, he was interested in other people, he would have really long conversations. He was just very interested in getting to know you and talking about what you want to talk about. He was very social in that way. He was known to be very funny. He was like the jokester of his family. He was always cracking jokes. He always had people laughing. Just in general, Craig seemed to be a very likable person. He was quite popular in the way that not many people disliked him, but very few people actually knew what a dark side Craig Price had to him. His friends were the only people that saw even a glimpse of what he was capable of. They would all go out together in the dead of night and go and rob houses together. They would break into their neighbours' houses and they would steal anything and everything they could that was of value. They would steal any cash that was laying on the side. They would ransack their own neighbours' homes and then just run back home at the end of the night and pretend they were sleeping. And Craig would even do this on his own, so don't think he was just being like led by this group of other kids. Like, no, he enjoyed this, he got his own fulfillment out of it. He would go out and do it solo if his friends didn't want to rob houses with him. From a very young age, Craig didn't have very many morals or ethics or empathy for his victims. He just did whatever Craig wanted to do. By the way, he's very, very young when this started. He was about 12 when him and his mates went out and started robbing houses. 12 years old, you're breaking in to people's houses. I couldn't even imagine that. Me at 12 years old, I was scared of talking back to my teachers, never mind breaking into someone's house. And actually it was at 12 years old when he was caught for his first robbery. They were literally caught in the act of breaking into a neighbour's house and stealing things. Craig was arrested and sent to court, where he was ordered to complete 6 months of counselling in the hopes that they could reform this bad kid back into like a good citizen. You know, maybe he was just going down a bad path, but 6 months of counselling could hopefully fix that and make him a law-abiding citizen again. Honestly, he got off pretty easy. To say that this wasn't the first time he'd robbed a house, I don't know if police were aware of that, but he was a multiple-time offender, and he just had to go to a psychiatrist's office once every week for 6 months, and he did. He completed all his counselling. They signed him off to say like, yep, cool, he's done everything that he was ordered to do, and the court order was over. And then Craig Price went right back to committing crimes. He had not changed an inch. He was hanging out with the exact same friends, they were committing the exact same crimes, but now there was the introduction of drugs and alcohol as well. His friends introduced him to drinking almost every single day. They were smoking weed, they were smoking normal cigarettes, and on occasion they would even get in like worse drugs. Hallucinogenics, class A's. I don't think they're class A's over there in America, but like cocaine, like the bad ones. Everything was unsupervised. These kids are 12, 13, 14 years old and they're doing any drug that they can get their hands on. Like, they were doing LSD just in each other's gardens and then just like going on their bikes on the street like normal kids. This case really kind of scares me in that way, that these were such normal kids with the things that they would do day in, day out. They would do sports, they would go to school, they would play out on the street on their bikes, play hide and seek. Like, even really young kid kind of games, but they would also be really high on drugs at the same time, and then play a game and then go and rob a house in the evening. It's like, it's really actually sad seeing like these kids' lives, that they are still kids but they're really not acting like it. They would even mix these drugs and alcohol quite a lot, like they were drinking most nights and then they would just do these drugs on top of it, which is so dangerous. And they had no, like, not even any older kids supervising them. They were the oldest kids, 12, 13, 14. It was at this point, when he was like trying all these substances, that Craig started bunking off school. He was like skipping days of school at a time, which he didn't really see to be an issue at the beginning, because Craig had always been really naturally smart. He was one of those kids that didn't really have to try, he didn't really need to study, he would still pull good grades just naturally. So in his head he's thinking, oh, a couple of days off here and there isn't really going to affect my grades overall. But this was a very slippery slope. The more days he had off, the more he enjoyed it, the more he wanted off. And in the end, he was barely going to school. He was genuinely really getting behind on his schoolwork. It got to a point where his school actually made him resit a year. They made him go back a year because he'd missed so much time. He just was no longer on the same level as other kids his age. He didn't know enough. So he had to go back and sit that year again with a bunch of younger kids. So now he was like separated from all his friends during school hours, and I can't imagine how frustrating that would have been, even though it's his own fault. I think he was quite embarrassed by this, and he also just didn't enjoy school anymore because he wasn't with his friends, and so in turn this made him not go even more. He would just spend most of his days during the day playing out with other kids on the street, other kids that had bunked off. And even though I keep like emphasizing their age and saying that they were such young kids, don't get me wrong, these kids knew what they were doing. They knew that robbery was wrong, they knew they shouldn't have been mixing drugs and alcohol, they'd heard all this, they'd had all the education. Their parents didn't like that they were committing crimes. A lot of their parents didn't even know. I know Craig's parents didn't know at the time, but I think a couple of the kids' parents knew because they were from like not as great families. All that being said, these kids knew what they were doing. They knew that they were committing crimes, they knew that they were putting other people at risk and like hurting other people, stealing other people's belongings, but they didn't care. They didn't care about the effects that their actions had on other people. They had no empathy for their victims. So yeah, this group of preteens and young teenagers would spend most of their time just playing out on the streets. Well, on their street, like their neighbourhood streets, which you would think is like one of the safest places for kids that age to play out, like right outside their home where their parents are. And that is the case most of the time, but not really for Craig, because as one of the only black kids in his whole area, it didn't really matter where he was always targeted and attacked and harassed by racists. On one particular occasion, Craig and all of his mates were doing a bike race down their street, and they were all like setting up on one side of the street when they noticed a couple of older white kids hanging around. Craig and his mates just kind of ignore it. It's just a couple of other kids. They keep working on their bikes, and all of a sudden they hear these older kids shouting racist slurs at Craig. This was unfortunately something that Craig had to deal with quite often, almost every single day, and so by now he had a particular way that he would go about it. His main thing was to just stay calm, take deep breaths, and don't show any emotion. Just ignore them. Don't let them know that they've hurt you or upset you. Just ignore them. Keep going with whatever you're doing, and hopefully they will just give up and leave. That was how he always dealt with racists shouting things at him, harassing him. He ignored everything. And don't get me wrong, it really, really affected him, but he was just good at putting on this front. Like inside, it really, truly devastated him that he couldn't be treated the same as his friends, that he couldn't go out and just have a bike race without being harassed and attacked for the way that he looked. He wanted nothing more than to shout back at these boys and to hurt them the way that they'd hurt him, but he knew that it wasn't worth it, and so he would just ignore them. And that's what he did on this particular day. He was ignoring these older boys, and they didn't like that. They kept shouting at him and shouting at him. They weren't getting a response, and so one of them then grabs a golf ball and throws it at Craig. Again, Craig tries to ignore it, even though that is insanely scary. Throwing a golf ball, they're freaking heavy. Surely that could kill you, right? If it hit you in the right place at the right speed, that's really scary. Regardless, Craig ignored it. And again, these older kids didn't like that. They wanted a reaction from Craig, and they weren't getting one, so they decided to approach him. They started taunting Craig, asking if he'd stolen the bike that he was riding, and like, who did he steal it off? And again, Craig is ignoring them. They're not getting the reaction that they want, and so in the end, well, this whole time they'd been shouting more slurs at him. I think they threw the golf ball a couple more times, but in the end, they got bored and they walked over to a car, jumped in and drove away. So now Craig and all his friends are relieved, thinking that they'd finally gone and then they could start this bike race. So they all get on their bikes and the race begins. They all set off down the road. They made it all the way to the end, almost at the end of the race, when suddenly that car starts speeding up behind Craig. It was the two older kids. They jumped in that car, swung around, and now they were driving after Craig. They were chasing him, getting faster and faster towards him. He was trying to like swerve out of the way. They were swerving after him, and it got to a point where Craig genuinely thought they were going to hit him off his bike if he didn't try and jump off first. So in order to save himself, Craig swerved his bike into the side of the curb and just flew off it. That was his plan, to throw himself off his bike. He did. He fell to the ground. He was in a lot of pain, and he just jumped up and ran away. Ran off into like someone's garden and just went and hid. Craig hid for a little while until he could no longer hear anyone on the street, and then when he finally came out of his hiding place, he found his bike completely mangled. Those two older boys had destroyed it somehow, ran over it maybe, but it was just so broken. It was beyond repair. And so Craig ran home to his family with what was left of his bike, and he was crying. He was so upset by everything he'd just been through. But instead of being comforted and supported by his family, Craig was just berated for even racing on his bike in the first place. They said it was dangerous. The next time Craig would experience racism on this level was about a year after. So that last incident happened when he was just 12 years old. This next one, he was 13. It was on July 27th, 1987. Once again, he was out playing games in the street with all the neighbourhood kids. They would play this one particular game called Manhunt, which was kind of a mix between hide and seek, so they would all go out and hide, and then when the seeker found the people hiding, they were then able to like run away. So then it kind of turned into a game of tag, where it's like you first gotta hide, but then when they find you, you just gotta keep running so that you don't get caught. So they were all gonna play Manhunt, but first Craig and a couple of the older kids went and smoked a joint, and then they joined in Manhunt afterwards. And this game sounds really fun, by the way, because the way that they played it, they had like a no boundaries rule. Well, actually, the only boundaries were people's houses. They weren't allowed to go in people's houses, but they played in like neighbours' gardens and on the driveways. They were allowed to hide under cars. It was really like no bounds. So they set off playing, and they're all, I think it was actually Craig that was counting, and everyone else was out hiding. And all of a sudden he hears shouting from a white car that was parked outside a neighbour's house. He looked up and saw a man sitting in this car with the window rolled down, shouting racist slurs at him. At Craig, a 14-year-old boy who was literally playing hide and seek. He had his hands over his eyes, counting, and this fully grown man is shouting racist slurs at him. Craig did his usual thing of just ignoring this man, even though he really did want to retaliate. This made him so angry, so upset, so offended. He wanted to fight back desperately, but he never thought it was worth it. So he just ignored it, kept counting, kept going with the game. And then the car starts up and starts driving directly at Craig Price, and he like ran out of the way, and it swerved to try and hit him exactly like that car had done a year before. Craig managed to get out of the way and the car eventually drove away, but this had then just put him in a really awful headspace. I can't imagine what that does to a 14-year-old kid who's just trying to play a game with his mates, and some old man in his car is literally trying to kill him. Anyway, he carried on playing the game as if nothing had ever happened. Craig was quite good at just like putting these things behind him and putting on a brave face and just continuing. But inside, the anger wasn't going away this time. He could get rid of it on the surface and carry on playing this game, but inside he couldn't stop thinking about that. And he couldn't stop thinking about how much he wished he could have fought back. All of this anger had just been bubbling up inside him for years, and he had never let it out in any capacity. He just had people being awful to him day in, day out, and this anger was about to come to a head. Later that night, Craig was sat in his room and he was still being eaten alive by these thoughts, like wishing that he'd fought back. He felt so much anger towards this man that he decided he had to get revenge. And Craig had a plan on how he was going to do that. He got dressed head to toe in all black. He grabbed a baseball bat from his bedroom and then he walked out into the street. His plan was to go and find that white car that was parked outside his neighbour's earlier in the day and just beat it, vandalise it, smash the windows in, just completely do this guy in. But when Craig got out onto the street, that car wasn't there anymore. And Craig was annoyed. He still had all this anger inside him that he thought he was finally going to be able to release, and yet he's now got there and realised that he can't, but he still wants to. He still wants to do something to let out this rage. So he's just like standing there in the street, staring at this house that no longer has the car parked outside it. And all of a sudden, his attention is quickly shifted to a cat running towards the house and in through an opened crack in the door. And that's when Craig got the idea to target the house itself instead of the car. He thought that it was probably that guy's house anyway, and if there was a door there that was literally open, he was going to take advantage of it. The plan was kind of exactly the same as what he was going to do to the car. He was going to break into the house and just bash everything in and smash stuff and just vandalise, just cause problems for this man that had been awful to him. So before he went and broke into the house, Craig had obviously been watching from outside for a little while, and he noticed that the TV was on in the living room. He could see that like flickering blue light, and so he creeped up to the house because he wanted to see who was in that living room. So he peeked in through this window and he saw moving boxes all over the living room. In fact, the only things that weren't in moving boxes were the TV that was on and a mattress on the floor that had a woman asleep on it. Immediately this confused Craig. There was a woman in this house. He hadn't expected to see a woman. If anyone, he was expecting to see that racist old man. He didn't know who this woman was. But in his head, he's thinking, she must be related to that man somehow. Maybe it's his wife or his sister or, you know, someone. And so Craig thought, well, if the man himself isn't here, then I guess I'll take out my anger on those that he cares about. So Craig snuck into the house through the open doorway. He made his way into the kitchen, and from there, he could see through an open door, he could see the woman sleeping on the mattress in the living room. And so he just stood in the kitchen staring at her for a few minutes. He was kind of trying to figure out how he was going to go about this, because like I said, the plan was just to like break everything, smash everything, which was clearly going to make a lot of noise, and he didn't really want to wake this sleeping woman up because then she'd call the police and he would get caught. He thought about potentially quieter ways that he could destroy this house. Maybe he could start a fire somewhere and then run away, and then she would be woken by smoke alarms and part of the house would be burned. You know, maybe that was a way to get back at this man. But then he realised he didn't really have a way to start a fire in the house, so that idea was out. And he was also realising at this point in time that he'd left his baseball bat outside. So he had come dressed head to toe with a baseball bat, ready to cause some vandalism, and then left the bat outside, snuck into the house, left the bat outside. So now he had to look for a weapon inside the house. He saw a frying pan sitting on the side, and so he thought, well, maybe, you know, could use that for the same thing as a baseball bat. And he picks it up and he starts like swinging it around, testing it, but it was just way too heavy. He was like, nah, that's not gonna work. So he put it back down on the side, and then he saw a kitchen knife laying on the side next to it. And at first, Craig was hesitant about using a knife because, well, I mean, that was completely different to the original plan. A knife does a very different job to a baseball bat. At this point, the thoughts that are circling his head are less about how he can vandalise the property and more about what damage he could do with this knife. He had originally planned to keep the sleeping woman alive and just damage the house around her. But now that this knife was laying there and he was thinking about what he could do with it, his plan changed. He grabbed the knife and walked into the living room. He stood just towering over this sleeping girl, and he was just watching her. He was just staring at her for a moment. And then she stirred. In that moment, Craig Price panicked and immediately just started frenzied stabbing this woman on the ground over and over and over again until he was completely exhausted and this woman was clearly dead. When he was done, Craig Price stepped back and looked at the dead body on the floor in front of him, and he realized that he was a murderer. At the age of 13 years old, he had just taken someone's life. And that someone was 27-year-old Rebecca Spencer, a mother to 2 children who had big plans for the rest of her life. She was going to go out and get a good job. They were just about to move houses. And Craig had taken all of that. Pretty soon after finishing stabbing Rebecca, Craig realised he needed to get the hell out of there. And so without touching anything, he snuck out of the front door again and just ran straight home. But actually, it was as he was approaching his own house, he was almost there, he was almost home, he realised that he had made a grave mistake back at the house. He remembered picking up that frying pan and testing it out, waving it around. He had put his fingerprints all over that pan. When police go in there and find that dead body, they're going to check for fingerprints, and immediately they're going to get it. He knew he needed to do something about that frying pan, and so Craig runs back over to the scene of the crime, sneaks in once again, grabs that pan, and runs away. At this point, he ditched the knife and the pan in some random bushes. I don't know where, I don't know how, and then he runs back home. And now that he was home for real this time, he ran upstairs to the bathroom, he took off all of his blood-soaked clothes and just threw them in a bin bag, tied it up. He jumped in the shower and washed all of the blood off his skin, and then when he was done, he took his bag of murder clothes and just threw them in the attic, hoping that his parents wouldn't come across them. Once he was done, he headed back to his bedroom now that he was all clean. He rolled a joint and smoked it, and then he crawled into bed with the family cat and it curled up on his chest, and he just fell asleep peacefully, as if he hadn't just murdered someone. The next morning, Rebecca Spencer's brother returns home from his night shift and finds his sister hacked to death on the floor of their living room. She is found in a pool of her own blood. And like I said earlier, this case went cold very, very quickly. Police had no leads. They had no idea that 13-year-old Craig Price was getting away with this murder. And he wasn't even slightly suspected at the time. He was never even brought up as a possibility in police's minds because, after all, he was a 13-year-old child. And police were looking at this murder thinking, has to be a man, it has to be someone big and strong. They didn't think about this big and strong 13-year-old. Because honestly, Craig Price did seem like a very normal kid. He was into all the normal things, sports, playing with the other kids on the street, going on his bike. There was nothing murderous or sinister or even concerning about this boy. There was nothing weird about him at all. He was just big for his age. That was the only thing that could possibly, be a clue that he is the killer. Looking back on this point in his life, Craig Price said, "I truly feel like getting away with it was my fate and my destiny. I really felt clever and supreme," which tells you a lot about his mindset at this point in time. He loves that he is getting away with murder. This is a power that he hasn't really felt before in his life. He has always felt inferior to everyone else because of the way that he's been treated by everyone else. But finally now, getting away with this murder, outsmarting police, knowing something that no one else knows, it's making him feel strong and powerful for the first time ever. He enjoys this feeling. In the weeks and months following this savage murder, Craig carried on just as normal. He was doing all the same things with his friends, going out, playing. He was still doing drugs and stuff. He was still doing the same crimes with his friends, robbing houses and stuff. But the point is, he was also living a very normal teenager's life. He was going to school on occasion, and like his parents never suspected anything. 2 years later, in August of 1989, Craig was out on his bike in the neighbourhood when he saw a woman and her 2 daughters also out on their bikes. These neighbours on their bikes were single mother Joan Heaton and her 2 young daughters, 10-year-old Jennifer and 7-year-old Melissa. They rode their bikes past Craig, and as they did, Craig heard a sound coming from one of their bikes. He looked up and he noticed that one of the little girls had like a chain that was disconnected on one of her wheels. And so Craig kind of flagged down the family and he was like, "Oh, I've noticed you've got this issue, I can fix it for you." Completely unprovoked, Craig offers to do a good deed for free for this family. But he felt like he had done something wrong. The way that Joan looked at him and responded to him, he said it was just very tense. He got a feeling that Joan didn't like him before she'd even met him. And he knew he hadn't done anything to deserve such a treatment. He had been polite, kind, nice. He was doing them a favour for free, and yet for some reason he thought Joan had a problem with him. And Craig had felt this kind of unwarranted judgment plenty of times before. He had a feeling that this was down to his race, that Joan was racist, and she didn't care what good he was doing for her family, she didn't like him just because of the colour of his skin. This is what Craig thinks at this point in time. But as he always had done, he just kept quiet. He ignored this feeling that he had. He fixed the little girl's bike. They said thank you, albeit a bit of a weird thank you, and then they rode their bikes off. A few days later, Craig was walking home from school on September 1st, 1989, when he walked past Joan Heaton's house, and he actually saw Joan in the window. He recognised her as that neighbour that he helped the other day, and he said that she was just glaring down at him, like scowling at him. He could tell that she had a problem, even from all the way up there in her window. And in that moment, all of that anger and rage and frustration started to swirl up inside him again. Everything that he had suppressed over the last year, 2 years, was about to come out again. That night, Craig went back to his house, and alone in his bedroom, he got drunk, he got high, and then to top all of that off, he did LSD as well, so he's tripping on top of all of that. But he was still absolutely raging underneath all of that. Like, even though he was medicated on so many different things, self-medicated on so many different things, he was still so angry that he just couldn't ignore it. He knew he had to do whatever it took to let this feeling out. So he walked up to Joan Heaton's house and he saw that all of the lights were off inside, but some of the windows were open. And that was when he got the idea to maybe climb in through one of those windows and just vandalise the house. Same plan as the first time. He just wanted to cause issue. He just wanted to cause damage. As far as we know, this was the original plan. But as we know from the start of this case, that was far from what ended up happening when this ended in the deaths of all 3 remaining members of the Heaton family. So Craig said he climbed into the house through the kitchen window, and something happened as he climbed in. He knocked something over, or he made a noise that woke up Joan Heaton. It alerted her and she came straight downstairs to the kitchen. So Craig hadn't had a chance to do anything. Joan walks in, turns the light on, and finds this kid has broken into her house. Craig wasted no time. He immediately launched himself at Joan, put his hands around her neck, and just started strangling her, both to try and kill her and also to stifle her screams. Until then, she was going to wake up the kids, she was going to wake up the neighbours. The 2 of them ended up like wrestling into the hallway almost, and then he eventually had her pinned down on the ground, strangling her. And all of this commotion had actually awoken her 2 daughters. Melissa and Jennifer ran out of their bedrooms and ran down to the hallway where they saw this man killing their mother. Once Craig saw these 2 little girls run like into the room, he hopped up off their mother and ran back into the kitchen. And Joan is laying on the ground. She can't really get up. She's so weak. This man has just been strangling her. And so she turns to her kids and she tries to tell them to go and call the police, go call 911. But before the girls could do anything, the intruder was back. Craig was standing in the doorway with a big knife in his hand. First he went for Joan, who was still laying on the ground. He was stabbing her over and over again, and she was fighting for her life. She was like trying to punch him and push him off her. She was biting at his arms and then he ended up biting her back. Ultimately, Craig was stronger than her. This 15-year-old boy was stronger than her. He managed to overpower her, stab her 58 times, and then when he was sure that Joan was dead, his attentions turned to her 2 young daughters. Like I said in the beginning of this video, he stabbed both of them so savagely, so aggressively, that he broke the handles off of the knives that he was using. He did this multiple times and left the blades just inside the little girls. And this was actually how he'd ended up injuring his hand. It wasn't from punching a car window, it was because he was frenzied stabbing these 2 kids so much that he was going out of control. He stabbed himself, he was breaking off the handles. Like, this was an absolutely insane attack. And once he'd finished killing all 3 members of the Heaton family, Craig then, for some unknown reason, starts walking around the house finding different things to cover the bodies with. So he grabbed a blanket, he grabbed a big sheet from the bedroom, he grabbed a rug, and then he goes and covers up all 3 of the bodies. And we still don't know why he did that. We can speculate. Killers tend to do this when they feel guilt or remorse or shame, embarrassment, but I don't know why he did it in this instance and not the first time. He then grabbed a trash bag from the kitchen and threw in all of the knives that he'd been using, all of the broken off handles of the broken knives he'd used, and he was able to grab all of the evidence that he possibly could and run away with it. He just ran all the way home, and none of the neighbours had heard any of this, by the way. Even though all 3 of those victims had been screaming, crying, shouting for help, no one had heard anything. So Craig was able to slip away into the night completely undetected. When Craig got back home, he ditched the trash bag of murder weapons and broken murder weapons in his shed in the garden, and then he ran up to the bathroom and did the exact same process as last time. Had a shower, washed all the blood off of himself, and then put his blood-soaked clothing in another trash bag and put that up in the attic, where the other lot still were, by the way. His parents still hadn't found the clothes from his first ever murder, and now his clothes for his second murders were up there too. He didn't feel the need to do anything differently from the first murder that he committed, since he'd clearly gotten away with it for so long. He'd clearly done something right. That was until that day when he was spotted by his basketball coach walking down the street with that bandage on his wrist. Ever since police got suspicious about Craig Price, the more they were putting together, he was now the main suspect in both of these murders. He was super tall, he was super big, super strong, he had the injury, like everything was lining up. He lived in the neighbourhood, he lived literally on that street. So police went and got a search warrant for Craig's home because they wanted to see what evidence might be hiding there. And honestly, this didn't seem to bother Craig all that much, quite surprisingly. So much so that as police were literally searching his house around him, he went and laid on the sofa and had a nap. While Craig was still asleep, the search actually expanded into his backyard, and that included the shed. As soon as police went in there, they found that trash bag of discarded murder weapons, knives that he had used to stab the Heaton family to death. As soon as they found it, they ran inside that house, woke Craig up from his slumber, and charged him with all 4 murders. At this point, his fingerprints had been taken, they had been sent off for testing, and they were now found to be a match to fingerprints at the scenes of both murder scenes. So Craig was taken down to the police station, accompanied by his parents, since he was a minor, and they, honestly, up until this point, I don't think they had any idea about any of this. They knew that he had robbed houses in the past because he'd been caught for that, but they had no idea about these murders. And they were begging their son to just tell the truth. Whatever the truth was, he needed to be honest with police. And so he did. Craig Price sat there and confessed to all 4 of those murders and told police in gruesome detail how he had done each one. He sat there, and as he was telling this story, even Craig's own family was so horrified by what their son was saying that his father actually had to get up and leave the room to throw up. Since Craig was only 15 years old at the time, this meant that he would be sentenced and trialed as a juvenile. He was going to be sent to juvenile court, which is very frustrating that a serial killer, even a child serial killer, will be sent to juvenile court because the thing is, once he was there, the maximum sentence that they could give him was 6 years. He pled guilty and he got 6 years for murdering 4 people, for being a serial killer that successfully got away with a murder for 2 years and would have got away with it for the rest of his life had he not murdered 3 more people. This guy killed 4 people and got just 2 years more than that in prison. And what's even worse than that is that Craig's criminal record would be sealed when he left juvenile prison. Like, his criminal record was going to be wiped. It wasn't going to affect him. The fact that he was a serial killer was not going to affect his life in the future. All of that sounds really, really scary, I know. But that being said, it never actually got to that point because Craig has never been released from prison, but for other things. He has been very badly behaved in prison. Well, actually, he's been quite a mixed bag. Generally, he is known to be quite a good prisoner. He's quite a model prisoner in that way. But every now and again, he'll get into like a really big fight and get like a chunk of years added to his sentence. They're the things that are keeping him in prison, is his just general anger and aggression. He's made like DIY weapons behind bars. He's made his own knives. He accidentally stabbed a police officer. Well, they say it was accidentally. I think it was just in his finger or something. He accidentally stabbed a police officer with one of his makeshift weapons at one point, which was another good chunk of years on his sentence. But then the last like major incident he's gotten into behind bars was when he was like, I think he was trying to murder someone. He was like repeatedly stabbing them with one of these makeshift knives, but because it was a makeshift knife, I don't think it killed the guy. He managed to recover. And so Craig Price got an extra 25 years on his sentence for that. For, I don't know what the exact charge was, but it does sound like attempted murder. So he still hasn't been let out of prison. He won't for a very long time, especially if he carries on this way. He's just going to keep getting time added and added and added forever. But yeah, that is all I have on this case. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed, please leave a thumbs up down below. I would really appreciate that, actually. Thank you. Thanks again to Casetify for sponsoring this video. Remember, if you want to get your hands on a new Casetify case, they are offering you guys 15% off when you go through my link. It's casetify.com/Eleanor. The link is also down below in the description, and that 15% off will be automatically applied at checkout. A huge thank you to all of my channel members for supporting the channel and helping me decide the cases that I cover. All of my tier 2 members are on screen right now, so thank you so much. If you want to become a channel member, you can click the join button down below. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. Like I said, if you enjoyed, please leave a thumbs up down below. That would really help me out. If you want to subscribe, I'll leave a circle with my face in it there. If you click on that, you'll be able to subscribe. Or if you want to watch another true crime video, there you go. I'll pick one out special. Click on that one. Anyway, thank you so much for coming. Bye.